Women of Wyoming Then and Now is brought to you by the Wyoming Historical Society and supported in part by a grant from the Wyoming Cultural Trust Fund, a program of the Department of State Parks and Cultural Resources. This program features unique female perspectives on events, themes, or narratives related to state history. We, the host, believe that one woman's action toward a better future can result in a greater legacy that inspires and equips many generations of women to come. Welcome, everyone. I am Janelle Molony. I am today's host of Women of Wyoming Then and Now. Joining me as a co-host is Leslie Wagoner with the American Heritage Center. And today our special guest is Bonnie Lawrence Smith. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Janelle.
Well, we are excited to have Bonnie Lawrence Smith with us today. She is the co-founder of the Bighorn Basin Art and Science Experience, which I can't wait to hear all about. And she's also the vice chair of the Wyoming Archaeology Society in Yellowstone and has made some remarkable discoveries in her career that I also hope she shares on for us today. Bonnie, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you both for having me. It was quite a compliment. So I am a fifth generation Wyoming native. My family homesteaded here on the Sheridan side in the early 1800s. And so kind of Wyoming's been a part of my heart and my life for several years, all of my life, I guess you could say. And so my grandmother grew up out on Badger Creek outside of Sheridan. And interestingly, she had an 8th grade education, but she ended up founding her own travel center in Sheridan with her partner, Susan Davis, and went on to travel the world. Well, she became my mentor. She is the one that gave me a love for all things ancient. Egypt was one of her favorite locations. In fact, for a while, she was engaged to a man from Cairo.
You are a world-class traveler yourself, I understand.
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to spend a month in Europe. I just got back and it was fantastic. Neolithic temples of Malta. It's fascinating. It's just world history. And we've got our own great world history right here that goes back thousands of years.
With what I know, we already think what you're doing is absolutely amazing and important for us to hear about, but also for us to follow through with. So I'm wondering if you can share for us about something in particular that you've recently done that will impact our future perspectives on Wyoming's history, especially as it relates to women.
Well, one of the things that I was able to participate in, oftentimes in archaeology, people get really hung up on state lines. History didn't have state lines. When you talk about Paleo-Indian people, they just lived in the plains or, the Plains Basin or the woodlands. And so I'm a plains archaeologist. I study plains people, indigenous people of the plains. So that bleeds over into not just Wyoming, but that bleeds into Montana, that bleeds a little bit into Colorado, the Lyndon Meyer site, things like that. So because of that, a lot of women in archaeology, not men, sadly, women tend to reach out across those lines to work together. And so I think it was 2013, I was invited to join the Montana Archaeological Society with a wonderful group of women to be on their education committee. And after that, we decided that we needed to recognize our sisters, especially the ones that had paved the roads for us prior to us coming on the scene. And so we created and founded the Sisterhood of the Traveling Trowel.
That's a great name. I love it.
Well, I wish I could take credit for it, but it was not my idea. But we had our inaugural sisterhood meeting at Chico Hot Springs in 2014. And it was sadly one of the final meetings that our sister Ruth Ann Knutson was able to attend. And so because of that, that kind of prompted us to found the Ruth Ann Knudsen Memorial Scholarship for young women in archaeology to help with field school or publication.
That is fantastic. You've carved a path for the next generation to come along beside you, not just come after you, but to literally get started and go on this adventure with you now. And I'm really proud of you for that.
So the Sisterhood of the Traveling Trowel, it's like our intent was basically to be a group of, most of us are older women, to encourage the younger women that are coming up. So often what we'll see is young women in anthropology, they'll be at a community college, and that's the end of it. It's like they take some anthro courses, they come to a meeting, and then they don't follow, they go into a different field. And I mean, that's fine. But we need these women to continue in the sciences, and we want them to know that they've got support. If they do want to continue in anthropology, we're there. You can call us, you can email us, you can meet with us. We're happy to help you. We're happy to help you find grant funding. We're happy to help you find scholarships.
Your interest in Wyoming history goes way back before Wyoming existed. So that's very exciting for us to hear about.
Yeah. When I first moved back to Wyoming, because I left for a while, I went to school in California and graduated UCLA in 2009. And I was back home within the week. I knew what I wanted to do because I had been one of those students in Wyoming that struggled. And teachers don't always know how to work with children of differing needs. And so my goal was to come back to Wyoming and be a teacher. And I just realized immediately that was not a good fit for me. I'm a little more outside the box thinking. And I got this great job at the museum. And I started in the retail store, but I started volunteering for the Draper Natural History Museum with Dr. Charles Preston. And I still remember we had gone out in the field with some other volunteers, and he was talking about some golden eagle nests, because that's the research, is the golden eagle research. He started in 2008, going into golden eagle nesting sites, seeing what they're actually eating, because there was this myth that they were eating sage grouse when rabbit populations decline. In actuality, they go after baby pronghorn, and we found that by going into the nests. Cool. So we're out in the field and we're looking for birds of prey when Charles starts talking about this rock art that's below these 3 golden eagle nests. And I'm like, really? Well, that's interesting. Because my joke always was, it's my background is anthropology and archaeology, so it makes perfect sense that I went to work for a wildlife biologist. It doesn't make sense at all. So that was where the sort of light bulb went on for me. I'm like, is there a correlation between these ancient rock art sites and golden eagle nesting locations? Because, anything, if you know about Plains Indians, golden eagles factor significantly into their cosmology. They believe that they're the messengers to the creator. So, they're so important. And so in doing the research, I started looking at all the different rock art sites that featured Thunderbird representations specifically. And yeah, we found a correlation between this symbol, these rock art figures, and golden eagle nesting locations. So that was the beginning of my research project. And it sort of culminated in an exhibit that's in the Lower Draper right now called Monarch of the Skies.
Why do you think it's important for women, particularly, just because of the way we think? We're different than men. Why do you think it's important for a woman to take a look at the art or the architecture or the remains left behind? What is it that a woman sees that is so unique to help build that historical context and fill in the blanks of the story?
Well, women have always kind of been the hearth and home. They're the ones that, it's like when you go to a site, or especially like in Mesoamerica, it's like you've got the 3 stones of the hearth. And it's like, it's women that create the home. And men leave behind debitage from stone tools. There's so much more to archaeology than lithics. Okay. So much more. Men are always like, they gravitate towards the tools, like the stone tools, the weaponry, the bighorn sheep bows. And I mean, that's great. But archaeology is so much more. It's like if you just look at a projectile in the soil, it has no context. It has no provenience. It has no story. And it has to be, looked at in context of a whole picture of the home. It's like, where was it found? In what context? What else was it found with? Otherwise, it's just a piece of rock. And so it's like, it's not just about hunting. It's not just about stone tools and shooting things. I mean, I see that correlation in men this generation with their obsession with firearms. And I'm just like, okay, some things just never change. But yeah, and I told him, I said, dude, there's linguistic anthropology, there's rock art, there's oh my, there's so much. Everybody thought that, even hunting and gathering societies, and I'm sure Leslie will attest this, they were always like, oh, men provided the food and women were just there to cook it. No, they have found in recent studies in looking at like the remains and studying it, that it was the diet consisted mostly of berries and things like that. Women were not just providing nutrition. They're the ones that are bringing life into this world. They're the ones that are creating the home, while the guys are out there like doing what guys do, just like slapping each other on the back and we're so great and let's go have our hunting party without the women. And the women are at home doing the same thing, preparing the hides, doing the beautiful beadwork and the quill work. I mean,
I would love to see students working with the mano and matate. What was that like? Because that was largely women's work. What was it like to grind that? I mean, think about knees and back, and that's that kind of work. It sounds so romantic to be out on your horse or just on foot and with your projectiles and you're shooting at things. Yeah, someone had to tan those hides, and someone had to make those other kinds of tools that were used for the home and the hearth. So,
well, and
a whole nother world.
Exactly. And generally, even on those bison jumps, like it's like the men would run those things off a cliff. Who was at the bottom processing those beasts?
There's so much more to the story, and I'm so excited that you are able to not only tell it because you are asking those questions and getting the answers, but you're encouraging us to do exactly the same, because our history matters, and who interprets our history matters as well. So with that project, you were really able to marry or blend history and science and even storytelling in that.
Absolutely. And that was what was so important also. It's one thing to interpret data, but to interpret another person's culture, it's not within my realm of authority. So I brought in Dr. Emerson Bullchief to lend a native voice to our project, because it's so important.
I'm thinking about that mix of art and science, and it sounds like you have really blended that in Bighorn Basin art and science experience. And I'm just curious how that came about, that you co-founded with Andrew Rossi. Can you talk about the founding of that?
Absolutely. So when everybody got locked down with COVID, I mean, 2020 was impactful for all of us. And you start seeing what's happening with students. Not every student, again, learns the same way. Some kids are great sitting in front of a computer doing their lessons. Not every student's going to learn that way. And so it was really kind of, and I don't want to use the word unfair, to expect other students to perform similarly to kids that can focus like that. And then on the heels of that, schools start cutting funding for art and science programs. And additionally, Science Kids, which was founded in Sheridan, pulled out of Cody.
Oh, So then we have nothing left.
So we
Oh,
had
wow.
nothing.
Mhm.
We legitimately had nothing. But we wanted to do something that wasn't just for kids. Because when science kids left, those children aged out at 13. So they don't need science after 13. That made zero sense to us. It's like they need science more than ever at that age, because it's like they're finally developmentally getting on a path and discovering what they like and what they want to do with their lives. And if you can continue on that, that's the goal. The end goal is making like future policymakers that are well informed, ultimately. And so that was why we were like, we have to do something. And so taking our backgrounds, Andrew's background was as an educator. He worked at the Cleveland Zoo actually for a while. He's fascinating. But he was an educator for the Dinosaur Center in Thermopolis. And they cut their education program. So they lost him. So I lucked out and Andrew moved to Cody and started working at the radio station. And so we worked together and we cobbled together this program. We were like, okay, so let's do a rotating class schedule. And doing so, we hire temporary teachers. They come in, they teach a course, not just one course. They can teach to multiple classes, adults and children alike. And covering all topics, not just archaeology, paleontology, painting, sculpture, just offering something solid to the community, because it's an entire community that needs it. It's not just the schools. But we would tell people about this program, and these adults are like, well, I want to do that. That sounds fun. I want to do that. And just so it starts getting you thinking. It's like, yeah, why don't we do more programs for adults?
It really sounds like your past experiences in education have informed you for what kinds of change or what kind of a legacy you want to leave behind. And that inspired you to do something about it. So I'm curious, what are those experiences that you've had, even as a woman, that have now directed your course to rally other women to get involved and to do something about what they see in their community?
Well, I think early on in Wyoming education system, in our education system, girls were kind of discouraged to go into the math and science.
Right.
Period. I mean, they didn't take time when the girls in my class would have questions about math, like in algebra, they give you these formulas. It's like, well, just fill this in. Well, why? Why does X and Y explain why? They couldn't explain. And it's like, if they can't explain why it is, then no one's going to benefit. Because I went into an art background first, because I was like, oh yeah, I can't do science. Science is for boys. Math is for boys. And I ended up going into an art background. And then I became a mother and then a non-traditional student. I went back to school, fell in love with science. And I'm like, if someone had just, sort of approached me like this, presented it like this, I would have loved it. And luckily, my daughter, I kind of mentored her into going into the sciences. Instead, it's one of those things. It's like, you don't have to be married to be fulfilled. You don't have to have children to be fulfilled. That is your path. If you decide to do that, great. If you don't, that's great too. My daughter is a chemical engineer.
Wow.
And it's like, could not be proud of her. I'm proud of the part that my grandmother and I played in that, in kind of like helping her along her path as a young woman and scientist. But that was the thing. It's like, in seeing how schools sort of condition women to not go into the sciences, to be mothers, to go make pottery. That's cool. Go be a baker, go be a chef, go do this. And no, in fact, when I was still at UCLA, the numbers were flipping. More women are going into anthropology and archaeology now than men. And it's about 70-30 now, which is fantastic.
We're always interested in how someone's work really preserves and promotes Wyoming history. And I mean, how would you answer that question? How do you think your work promotes and preserves Wyoming history?
Well, I'm hoping that the work I do is creating, it's like inspiring younger people to go into these fields because we don't know everything yet. We continue to find out new things all the time. Like my project on golden eagles. I was flabbergasted when I went to Emma Hansen, who was the Plains Indian Museum curator, and I'm like, "Hey, Emma, I just kind of had this lightning bolt moment, and I wanted to ask you, have you heard research on this?" She goes, "No." She goes, "But that would be an interesting project. Just the correlation between the Thunderbird rock art and golden eagle nesting. You would have thought." I'm like, someone had to have done something on this already. No. So there's still so many projects out there that young women could get involved in. I mean, we've got research in Yellowstone, like the gray wolf issue, right? Mm-hmm. So those reintroduced wolves, right, that came from Canada, they're all the pre-extirpated wolf material sits at the Smithsonian in DC. So then wolves were exterminated out of Yellowstone. Well, the Draper became the repository for all the reintroduced wolf material whenever the U.S. Fish and Wildlife would have to go in for control purposes and take wolves out of the population. So the Draper now houses about 170 wolf skulls. Mm-hmm. This is a great project for a young woman to get into, to look at those pre-extirpated, the skeletal material in DC, compare it to the material at the Draper, and finally answer the question once and for all, are they different? Are they a different species? Because that's been the argument this whole time. Oh, well, those Canadian wolves, they're bigger, they're different. Well, maybe, but are they different?
There's so much opportunity for women to get involved and answer that question. Why?
Absolutely. Exactly.
So when we're asking ourselves that question while we're young or my age or older, we can actually begin to have an open conversation and say, well, if no one has the answer, let's go find it.
Mm-hmm.
So I love that you're inspiring younger girls to see what's out there. And if they don't have a satisfactory answer, go and find it. And that's exactly what historians feel every single day is the answer. Where's the answer? We dig, and we go and get that. So thank you for prompting that response in our viewers today.
Well, women have just as much right to pursue those answers as men.
Oh my gosh, so much. I remember a geometry teacher saying to me, "Why can't you understand this?" Just like beating me on the head mm-hmm. with it. And so that's so discouraging.
Absolutely.
And so how do you turn that table and encourage young women? What would be your suggestion, say, in the Wyoming educational system? I realize that's very broad.
No, not really.
What do you think?
I think it's going to have to be extracurricular programs. We're in a completely new playing ground. After COVID, the world that we live in is completely different. And so moving forward, we have this awesome opportunity to change that for the better. And as I'm sure you saw in my CV, I'm also the state coordinator for Project Archaeology, which also was created in response to a need. There was a lot of looting going on in Utah. And so they figured, it's like archaeologists with the BLM were just like, what can we do? Because it was generational. It was grandpa and grandma going out with the grandkids, and it's just that Indian stuff. And so they figured out, if we can write curricula that correlates with Common Core, and we work with teachers, and we get that in the classroom, we're I think 28 years in, and we're already seeing the change from that.
So there's a very big disconnect there of who gets to dig up the answers, who gets to write the answers. And it's very important that people with authoritative voices and backgrounds are able to weigh in. And it sounds like you have done that by inviting tribal voices, tribal elders to comment, and not just comment, but have authoritative impact on your work.
Agency.
Yes, absolutely. And now more than ever, we have an absolute wealth of information at our fingertips. And so it's even easier to access authoritative voices, books, blogs, researchers. And so it's important that we definitely do make those contacts. But if we don't continue this process of gathering the information, asking the why, digging into it, and then resharing that information, we're going to see that giant wealth of information peter out. So in one or two thoughts, can you share your encouragement or advice for others who do want to have that impact? They do want to preserve or explore their local or ancestral history. And how can they do that in a way that's responsible and will have a positive, long-lasting impact?
Well, I mean, if you want to explore your ancestral history, there's so much more than ancestry.com. There just is. For example, researching archives, working with the local libraries, reaching out. I found even doing research projects for when I was in school, primary source information is great. I mean, reach out to the author, reach out to the researcher. What's the worst that's going to happen? They're not going to respond. They're going to say no. In my experience, they always say yes, and they want to talk to you.
Yeah.
And just get involved. I want to be remembered as someone who helped give my community opportunity.
We think you have achieved that already. Well, that's all the time that we have for today's interview, but I know that there is so much more to be learned from your experience and from when we take a look back into our statehood history. And we are just delighted to have the opportunity to pass even more information to our viewers. So we're going to include comments and links and resources so that way you can take one more step into the past. Thank you so much for joining us today, Bonnie. It was a pleasure.
Thank you guys so much for having me. It was fun.
It was fun. Thank you, Bonnie. It was such a joy to talk to you.
Well, I'm looking forward to talking to you both a lot more in the future.
Okay.
Definitely. It's a date. Bye,
All right.
everyone.